Even if Prost won the race, with Rosberg now out, Mansell had such a big lead back to Stefan Johansson in fourth that he could just cruise around and claim the third place that he needed to be world champion. That was, of course, until this happened. At the time, Mansell said he was glad to be in one piece after that spectacular failure, and he did say he'd been cruising along and that the tyre failed without warning. In his book in the mid-90s, he said, as I pulled sixth gear, approaching 200 miles per hour, the left rear tyre exploded and with it went my championship. When I finally brought my convulsing car to a stop at the end of the long back straight, it suddenly struck me like a thunderbolt that the world championship had gone. I slumped. It was so hard to take. I will quickly say, I think convulsing car is a great description for what happens from the moment the tyre explodes to the moment Nigel brings it to rest in the escape road. I like that. Andy, obviously we're going to go over this in quite a lot of detail. Let's start with the incident itself. What did you think when you saw it happen? And do we have to give Mansell credit for how he kept that convulsing car under control?
Obviously, there are people now make a whole career out of overreacting to incidents that go on in F1, but I'm pretty sure at that age I was jumping out of the sofa and absolutely flabbergasted by what I'd just seen. One, because I thought that Piquet was now going to win the championship, and two, because it's just one of the most dramatic, unexpected moments to unfold live in any sport, I think. You know, just here's the guy seemingly cruising to the world championship, and in a blink of an eye, it's all gone. If you're being uncharitable or Matt Beer, you might say that maybe the wrestling with the car is more for the TV than it is to actually bring it to a halt. But I think that's really, you'd have to be incredibly anti-Mansell to do that. No, he does a fabulous job of keeping that thing out the wall and coasting it down into the escape road there. And much as I was absolutely rooting for the other guy in the pits, I couldn't help but feel very sorry for him then. You know, that's not the way I don't think anybody, you have to be incredibly partisan to want to see somebody lose in that way. And, you know, that's not the way I wanted it to unfold. But it did make for, you know, absolutely brilliant. That would have been played out every TV news bulletin across the world, front page, that with the one with the sparks, the tyres out. It's just such a fabulously iconic image that went all around the world.
I think it's just the law that because Mansell was involved, it had to be that spectacular, didn't it?
Yes.
There had to be the story about the sensational save. And, you know, if a tyre blows out at that speed, you know, it does take some effort to get the car under control. I'm sure other drivers would have been able to do it as well, but it can go very badly wrong. So it's just the law that there needs to be that level of drama. It can't just be, oh, the tyre goes and he pulls off. There has to be this
Mansell was never going to have the Rosberg failure, was he? Where he just sort of grinds to a halt.
Exactly. It had to be an amazing visual, and of course, it just by providence, it had to be live as well. It wasn't something that was missed. It was just literally an explosive moment. Just fantastic for Formula One because of the story, and terrible for Mansell and everything, but what a story it created and what an image.
Good point about the TV coverage, though, Ed, because so often in this era, with cars breaking down and suffering failures, you would cut to a car already stopped, and then Murray Walker's line would be, that's Senna, stopped at the side of the road, that sort of thing. He may have still said on Colossi, that's Mansell, I don't know. But it's incredible. The live pictures, this is so different to if we'd just seen him coming to a stop, and then you see the replay, the drama wouldn't be the same. So, yeah, an amazing moment. Still one of the most iconic images in F1's television history. Let's talk then about Williams' race strategy and why. Let's not forget, it was the plan all along not to make pit stops here. Mansell said in his autobiography that before the race, he had wanted to make a pit stop, but Williams decided tyre changes wouldn't be necessary because Goodyear had assured them the tyres would go the distance. And apparently Piquet radioed during the race to say he didn't think he'd need to come in for a stop. Mansell called it a terrible mistake by the team to not let him stop. He said in his book, I wanted to change them. There was no reason not to pit, but they told me to stay out. So I'd be curious to know if that was post-Rosberg failure or Nigel just wanted to make the stop anyway. Speaking in Maurice Hamilton's book on the history of Williams, Mansell said, here we go, he had radioed during the race that he wanted to change tyres, but everybody thought it was best to stay out. Goodyear said the tread depth was okay on Prost's car. Remember, Alain had made that stop, so Goodyear had had a chance to look at those tyres. So Nigel says, there was not a problem. The lap times were good, so they said stay out. Patrick Head has mentioned in a few interviews over the years that Williams had some other tyre failures during testing in 1986, but whenever he spoke to Goodyear about it, they were not very responsive and kept telling him that no one else was having problems, so it must be something on the Williams car. And Patrick tried to explain to them that it was probably a Williams problem because the Williams had more downforce than everybody else. So he told them, you're seeing the problem with us before you see it with anyone else. And he didn't think the tyres were strong enough. Ed, it's obviously really difficult to ignore the benefit of hindsight, but do you think it was odd that Williams were trying to do this race without a pit stop? I went back and looked, having read reports at the time. I then went back and checked. The leading cars hadn't tried a zero-stop race since round 2 at Jerez. So why suddenly do it now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wonder if they were just unduly influenced by that Berger Benetton Pirelli masterpiece the race before, because you wouldn't consider that to have been an outright leading car at that stage. So it was a strange decision because Goodyear had gone backwards and forwards a bit in terms of on whether its tyres would last. In Adelaide, there'd been quite varying conditions, and I think they'd even changed their mind after the warm-ups. So yeah, it's a bit strange, especially because Williams had problems. They were putting the most stress on the tyres because of the speed and the downforce. And I think if you've got Goodyear being a bit inconsistent, you might think, this could be a little bit of a worry. So, yeah, I do wonder if that was wise. Of course, the thing that's very difficult is I've never been able to find out from anyone or anything that really says definitively what caused the failures, because certainly Mansell's one was consistent with it being a structural failure with load, because he'd just come through that fast left-hander onto the Brabham straights. That's the maximum load. It's the correct side of the car to be stressed the most it would be. So if you're going to have some kind of structural failure, it might be that. But this time, there's every chance there could have been some debris there that both he and Rosberg got, because you get cars blowing up and failing, bits falling off them. There was a lot more just general stuff around. So it could have just been one of those flukes. And certainly the tyres that came off other cars that then stopped as a result. I've occasionally seen suggestions, there were hints that there might be a failure coming, but most of the time people say, they looked okay. And the tyres that come off Prost's car earlier were okay, which is why Goodyear had told everyone, no, it looks all right. Prost tyres seem pretty good in terms of the three that hadn't suffered the puncture. So, yeah, I think with hindsight, it's very easy to say, what on earth were they doing? And it does seem a little bit odd, particularly because they could have responded to Prost's stop as well, which might have been a wise thing to do. So, yeah, again, certainly wrong, but you don't have teams of tyre modelers and people going through all that data, so you always have to have that in mind. It's a much more inexact science. Williams could have been more cautious with that. I think perhaps you could argue the decision was made, but it's not, oh, you complete idiots, what on earth were you doing? I don't think that's a remotely fair accusation to level at them, particularly seeing as, who knows what would have happened. No guarantee that the same fate would have befallen anybody else had they stayed out.
I do think, though, when you go, when Goodyear say, Prost's tyres are fine, it's like, well, of course they are. It's Alain Prost. It's not necessarily the greatest guide for everybody else. Anyway, Williams' reaction to Mansell's failure this time was almost instant. A lap after Nigel's tyre exploded, Piquet was called into the pits from the lead, which would have won him the championship, but he came in to make a precautionary stop to change tyres. Patrick Head made this call and has spoken about it many times, and he says that in the end, his logic was if he couldn't guarantee Piquet wasn't going to suffer a failure, then he didn't want to take the risk of it happening at the end of a straight where he wouldn't have time to slow down before hitting something like Mansell did. Andy, you're watching this at the time as a Piquet fan. How did you feel when you saw him peel into the pits? Did Williams do the right thing?
The two different questions. I was absolutely gutted because there wasn't enough time left in the race for him to possibly make up the deficit of the time that was going to cost him, regardless of how quickly the pit stop went. So it meant that any hope of the championship was completely gone. Obviously, as a gung-ho 12-year-old, I was like, just go for it, But the reality is when the sister car has just suffered such a spectacular failure as that, and we've seen Rosberg's one go as well, I don't think there's any way that you can just roll the dice on that. that you can just say, oh yeah, we'll just let it play out. You owe a duty of care to the driver, if nothing else, or the other cars on track or the spectators or whatever, when you've got that knowledge to make that call. And obviously that's what they had to done. And as a more mature adult, that's exactly the call that I would have made. But 12-year-old me was absolutely just rolling the dice, letting that go to the end and seeing what's happened and, land a third world championship. But absolutely the right call, sadly.